Under sedation at the dentist, my fiancée whispered. I slept with his boss. In our bed. Her dad was watching the monitor. I was holding her hand. The smell of antiseptic always made me uneasy, but that morning it was worse. The small dental clinic was quiet except for the faint hum of machines and the steady beep of a heart rate monitor in the corner. My fiancée, Alicia, was reclined in the chair, a pale blue blanket over her. She was supposed to be having a simple wisdom tooth extraction under mild sedation. Her father, Evan, insisted on coming along. He said he wanted to make sure everything went smoothly since Alicia was terrified of dentists. I stood by her side, holding her hand, watching her eyelids flutter as the anesthetic took hold. The dentist murmured something to the nurse, checking her vitals on the screen. Everything looked fine. Alicia's breathing was slow, even. Evan stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the monitor as if it were a stock ticker. The dentist smiled politely and told us it would only take 15 minutes. He turned on the suction and began working. I focused on Alicia's fingers twitching slightly in my hand, her nails pressing faintly into my palm. Then, she murmured something. It was quiet, almost indistinct, like a dreamer talking in her sleep. At first, I didn't think much of it. She mumbled again, something about his cologne. The nurse chuckled softly and said, "Some people say the funniest things under sedation." But the next words came out clear, drawn in a breathy whisper that cut through every sound in the room. I slept with his boss in our bed. The suction stopped. The nurse froze mid-motion. The dentist's eyes flicked to me, then to Evan, who had turned pale as paper. The sound of the monitor was suddenly deafening, steady, rhythmic, indifferent. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I misheard her. I wanted to believe it was just random nonsense, the kind of incoherent thing people say when half unconscious. But the way her tone shifted, the way the words seemed to roll out naturally, like she'd said them before, made my stomach twist. Evan looked at me, but said nothing. The nurse awkwardly resumed suctioning, pretending not to notice the tension. The dentist tried to defuse it, saying sedation made people say all sorts of strange confessions, but even he looked uneasy. Alicia kept mumbling, drifting between sedation and wakefulness. Something about the bedspread, how he knew every detail, and keeping it secret. My mind went blank. I felt every drop of blood drain from my face as I realized she wasn't talking about a fantasy or a dream. She was recounting something real. I didn't say a word. I kept holding her hand, my thumb tracing over the engagement ring I had given her just 3 months earlier. Evan stayed frozen beside the monitor. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, then closed again. When the procedure was done, Alicia stirred, blinking slowly, groggy and unaware. She smiled faintly at me, her lips swollen from the anesthesia. She asked how it went, completely oblivious. I forced a small nod. The dentist said everything went smoothly. Evan stayed silent the entire time, his hands gripping the back of a chair like he might crush it. We drove home together, me, Alicia half asleep in the passenger seat, and Evan following behind in his car. She mumbled about wanting ice cream, humming to herself, her head lolling against the window. I stared straight ahead the entire drive, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When we got home, I helped her inside, tucked her under a blanket on the couch, and set an ice pack on her cheek. She smiled weakly and drifted off again. I stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, that same rhythmic breathing that had sounded so innocent an hour ago. The words echoed in my head, every syllable, every pause. I slept with his boss. In our bed. It didn't feel real. My body went on autopilot. I took out the trash, washed a few dishes, and then sat at the edge of the bed staring at the same pillow she had mentioned under sedation. There was no scent, nothing out of place. The sheets were clean, but that didn't mean anything. Around midnight, when she finally fell into deep sleep, I unlocked her phone using the fingerprint she had registered. I'd never gone through her phone before. I wasn't the suspicious type, but my hands moved like they already knew what they were about to find. The messages were buried deep in muted chats. One name stood out, just the initial M. No profile picture, no emojis. I scrolled. The last message was from 3 weeks ago. You left the earring again. I'll drop it off when he's at work. I kept scrolling. Our bed feels different with him there now. Weird. Another message, weeks older. Don't change the sheets. I want it to still smell like you. That one hit me like a blade twisting into my chest. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the kind that leaves your limbs heavy and numb. It could only be one person, Mark Preston, my direct manager. The man who'd hired me 2 years ago, mentored me, brought me into the company's core projects. The man who had congratulated me at our engagement dinner with a toast and a pat on the shoulder. I scrolled further back and found hotel receipts, screenshots of meeting confirmations, pictures of wine glasses. And then, One photo that made everything real. Alicia lying on our bed, her hair spread over the same gray comforter, a man's hand visible at the edge of the frame. Mark's watch, the same stainless steel Omega he wore every day. The floor felt like it tilted beneath me. I set her phone down slowly, breathing through my teeth to stop the shaking. My mind was racing, thinking of every work trip, every late yoga class, every time she'd smiled at her phone and said it was her friend messaging. It all fit now. Every gap, every lie. At 2 a.m., Evan texted me, "We need to talk tomorrow. Just us." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I turned off the phone, lay on the couch, and stared at the ceiling until morning. When sunlight crept through the blinds, Alicia was already up, sipping soup with a spoon, smiling as if nothing happened. Her cheek was swollen, but she looked peaceful. She asked me if I could drive her to the pharmacy later. I said yes. My voice didn't sound like mine. On the way, she hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers on her knee. Every small gesture made my stomach twist. I wanted to yell, to confront her, to ask how long it had been going on, but I couldn't. Not yet. Evan called during the drive. I picked up. He said he'd drop by in the evening. His tone was firm, controlled, but there was something else underneath, shame. Maybe guilt. That night, when he came, Alicia was asleep again from the pain meds. We sat in the living room. He didn't look at me at first. Then he spoke quietly. He said he didn't know what to tell me at the clinic. He didn't want to believe it either. He said Alicia had always been reckless, emotional, and that her last relationship ended because of something similar. He said he'd hoped she'd changed. I listened, silent. The room felt heavy. He admitted that hearing her confess under sedation was the most humiliating moment of his life. Watching his daughter expose herself like that, knowing her fiancé and father were both in the room, it crushed him. He told me to think carefully before doing anything rash. That she would deny it, cry, twist the story. He said she always did. I didn't argue. I thanked him for his honesty and said I'd take care of it. He left quietly. When I returned to the bedroom, Alicia was half awake, murmuring something about her dreams. She reached for my hand in the dark. I hesitated, then let her fingers wrap around mine. She whispered she loved me. I said nothing. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't confront her yet. She wouldn't cry her way out of this. She wouldn't twist it or make me doubt what I'd heard. I wanted her to believe everything was fine while I figured out how deep this went. Because if she could look me in the eye, kiss me, sleep beside me every night, and still bring another man into our bed, then I wanted to see how far she'd go when she thought no one knew. That was the night everything shifted inside me. Something quiet, something cold. And from that moment on, I wasn't her fiancé anymore. I was the man who was going to end her lies without ever raising his voice. The next few days felt like living inside a movie where everyone else had the script but me. Alicia moved around the apartment like nothing had happened, sending work emails, blending smoothies, scrolling through her phone with that same casual rhythm she always had. She was good at pretending. Too good. I started matching her calm with my own. I made coffee every morning, asked about her sleep, kissed her cheek before heading to work. I needed her to believe I was still the same person who didn't know a thing. But every time her phone buzzed, my chest tightened. At work, Mark greeted me like usual, cheerful, confident, loud enough for the whole office to hear his voice. He was one of those people who thrived on attention. The kind who never really looked at you, only past you. He asked about Alicia's recovery and offered me a beer after work to celebrate surviving wedding planning. The words almost made me laugh. I said sure. We went to a bar near the office. He ordered expensive whiskey, the kind he claimed real men drink. He talked about deals, upcoming promotions, how the company was looking to expand to a new branch. I nodded and smiled while my stomach twisted. Every time he leaned closer, the faint trace of his cologne, smoky, sharp, recognizable, made my skin crawl. When he went to the restroom, I stared at his phone left on the table. For a second, I almost grabbed it. But that would have been too obvious. Too desperate. Instead, I asked the bartender for the receipt when we left, claiming I needed it for expense tracking. It wasn't much, but it gave me a small thread to pull later: time, place, payment details. At home, Alicia was lying on the couch watching some dating reality show. She smiled when I walked in, asked how my night went, and joked about my bromance with Mark. She wasn't nervous. Not even a flicker. She'd buried her guilt so deep it didn't exist anymore. That night, after she fell asleep, I went to her car parked in the lot. I'd bought a small voice recorder that afternoon, a simple black device with long battery life. I hid it inside the lining of the driver's seat, just under the fabric. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation. For the next few days, I lived two lives, one where I played the loyal fiancé, and one where I quietly took notes. Alicia started leaving for yoga twice a week again. Her sessions, apparently, lasted 2.5 hours each. I checked her car's GPS through the insurance app. She didn't even know it logged every trip. She wasn't going anywhere near the studio. Instead, she was driving 25 minutes out to a quiet suburb, Maplewood Drive. At first, I thought it might be a friend's place, maybe a colleague's. But then I remembered Mark's address from the company Christmas party. Maplewood Drive. It felt like every bone in my body had turned to stone. I waited until the third yoga night to follow her. I left work early, parked 3 houses down, and watched through the windshield. Her car pulled up right on schedule. She walked up to Mark's front door carrying a bottle of wine and a bag that looked suspiciously like an overnight kit. She didn't even hesitate. The porch light came on. Mark opened the door. No surprise. No caution. Just a grin. I sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. The blinds were open just enough for me to see them inside. She took off her jacket, laughed, poured herself a drink, and leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her hand rested on his chest, her head tilted the same way she did with me. Something cold and strange settled over me. Not anger, not jealousy, just an eerie calm. I didn't take pictures. I didn't record anything. I just watched until the lights in the living room went dim and their shadows disappeared down the hall. I drove home without a sound. The next morning, she came back smelling like lavender soap. She said traffic was awful and that she might quit yoga because the instructor's attitude sucked. I nodded, made her coffee, and packed her lunch. She smiled and called me the most patient man alive. If only she knew. A week later, Mark asked me to join him on a client trip. It was only a one-day event, but he wanted me to handle a presentation. I agreed immediately. While he was outlining the plan, his phone lit up on the desk. A message preview popped up for a split second. Can't tonight. He's off early. The contact name was A. That was the moment I stopped wondering and started planning. That night, I listened to the recording from her car for the first time. I didn't expect to hear much, maybe a few phone calls or some music. But after about an hour of driving sounds, I heard her voice. Calm, casual. Then another voice, Mark's. He was asking if I'd suspected anything yet. She laughed and said I was too trusting. They joked about the day of the dental procedure. She said her dad looked like he'd seen a ghost. She even admitted she remembered saying something, but didn't think anyone took it seriously. I stopped the playback there. My hands were shaking too much. The next morning, I went into work earlier than usual. Mark wasn't there yet. I printed out a few key project files he'd left incomplete, things he'd been taking credit for, but never actually finished. I made copies of transaction records I'd quietly pulled from the shared drive. I had everything I needed. Not for revenge, not yet, but for insurance. At lunch, Alicia texted me saying her father wanted to meet me over dinner that weekend. That sounded strange, considering he'd barely spoken since the day of the confession. When Saturday came, we went to his house. He greeted her coolly, almost formal. His tone with me, though, was strangely warm, measured, deliberate. Dinner was awkward. Evan barely looked at her. At one point, Alicia excused herself to the restroom. As soon as she left, he asked if I'd decided what to do. I told him I had. He said he wouldn't interfere, whatever I chose. But he wanted me to know something. That Mark wasn't just some random man to Alicia. She'd met him before we ever dated. Years back, she'd worked as his assistant. Apparently, things ended badly when Mark was still married. So when she coincidentally met him again at my company party, it wasn't coincidence at all. When she came back from the restroom, she acted like she hadn't heard a thing. She smiled, joked, tried to lighten the mood. Evan didn't respond. After dinner, she suggested we stop for ice cream. She laughed, saying it was nostalgic, just like after her dentist visit. I nodded, pretending to share the memory, but inside I was watching her every move, every glance at her phone. When she dozed off that night, I opened her laptop. She always used the same password. There were emails, drafts never sent, notes with names, dates, reminders to delete certain chats. One note caught my eye. Transfer account before he finds out. There was an attached document labeled Joint Plan. It listed transactions between her and Mark, expenses disguised as marketing reimbursements. Thousands of dollars. By morning, I had all of it copied onto a drive. She woke up, yawning, asking if we could go for brunch. I said sure. She smiled, brushed her hair back, and said how lucky she was to have me. I smiled back, but in my mind, I wasn't thinking about brunch. I was thinking about Monday, about walking into that office and finally pulling the first thread that would unravel both of them. Because now, it wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. It was lies stacked so high they'd collapse under their own weight the moment I nudged them. And I was going to make sure that when everything fell apart, they'd both look at me and realize I hadn't shouted, I hadn't begged, I hadn't cried. I just smiled and waited. Monday morning arrived wrapped in silence. I'd barely slept, but I didn't feel tired, Just steady, unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. Alicia left for work early, cheerful, humming like everything in the world was perfectly normal. She kissed me on the cheek, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Her act was flawless. Mine had become better. At the office, Mark was pacing in his glass-walled corner, barking into his phone about invoices and approvals. His voice carried like always, confident and loud. I walked past, pretending to take notes on a clipboard, just to see if he'd look nervous. He didn't. He smirked and gave a thumbs up, like we shared some inside joke. He had no idea the joke was already over. I'd spent the weekend preparing a folder thick with documentation, expense reports, emails, timestamps, and matching bank transactions. Each one led back to Mark's private accounts and Alicia's consulting reimbursements. The irony was, he'd been using the same corporate slush fund he'd taught me to manage. He thought I wasn't paying attention. At 9:45, I went straight to the senior branch director's office, Angela Morales. She was sharp, no nonsense, and, most importantly, she'd always distrusted Mark's theatrics. I asked if she had 15 minutes to review something important regarding potential compliance issues. Her eyes narrowed immediately. She told me to close the door. I laid the folder on her desk and began walking her through the documents one by one. Her expression changed with each page. By the time I reached the third transaction, she was leaning forward, frowning deeply. When I showed her the personal reimbursements disguised as company marketing fees, she stopped me. She picked up her phone and called HR on speaker. "Get compliance in here. Now." I sat back in the chair and watched the dominoes start to fall. By noon, word had spread through the top floor that an internal audit had been triggered. People started whispering. Mark's face, when he was finally called into the boardroom, was worth every sleepless night. He looked pale, confused, defensive. He asked for me twice, as if I were supposed to back him up. I stayed at my desk, calm, typing as if nothing was happening. When he came out an hour later, his tie was loosened, his eyes furious. He walked straight toward me. For a second, I thought he might swing. Instead, he leaned over my desk and whispered, low and venomous, "You think this ends well for you?" I didn't respond. I just looked at him, long enough for him to see that I wasn't scared. Then Angela stepped out of her office, flanked by 2 HR reps, and called his name again. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and followed them. By the end of the day, he was suspended pending investigation. When I got home, Alicia was sitting on the couch in a hoodie, her face red from crying. She looked up as soon as I came in. I already knew who'd called her. "You talked to my dad," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Her eyes were swollen. "He told me he knows. About everything." Still silence. She stood, pacing. "He won't even pick up my calls. He said he's disgusted with me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" I kept my coat on. She started trembling. "You did this," she said. "You told him." "No," I finally said. "You did. Months ago. You just didn't know he heard you." Her face twisted as if she'd been slapped. For a few seconds, she said nothing, then broke into a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "You're seriously taking that anesthesia crap seriously? You're insane." I didn't argue. I just dropped my bag on the counter and went to the bedroom. She followed, ranting, trying to pull explanations out of thin air. She swore I'd ruined her life over a stupid misunderstanding. I didn't answer, but the silence started to scare her more than shouting ever could. She stopped talking eventually, realizing words weren't landing anymore. The next morning, I left for work early. My phone buzzed nonstop, emails from legal, HR, and upper management. The audit had confirmed everything. Mark's personal accounts were frozen pending further review. His access badge was revoked. He was officially terminated by noon. Angela called me into her office again that afternoon. She said my cooperation and detailed reporting had saved the company from potential legal exposure. There was a promotion opening, head of analytics. She wanted me to take it. I accepted without hesitation. It wasn't triumph I felt, just closure. But life doesn't hand you closure cleanly. It always finds a way to twist the knife once more. That evening, I came home to find Alicia gone. No note, no message, just her closet half empty and her laptop missing. For a moment, I thought she'd left for good. Then, an hour later, she came back, disheveled, trembling, eyes bloodshot. She threw her phone onto the table. "He's gone," she said. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mark," she said, her voice breaking. "He left the city. Deleted everything. He said he can't talk to me because of the investigation." I stayed silent. She started crying harder. I didn't know he was using company money. I thought. She stopped herself, realizing how hollow it sounded. "I thought it was just us." Us. The word hung between us like smoke. She tried to sit beside me, but I moved away. That small shift seemed to crack something in her. She started shouting about how I destroyed everything, how her father wouldn't speak to her, how Mark had ghosted her, how the world had turned against her. Then she said the one thing that made my jaw tighten. He told me he'd take care of me, that I didn't need you once the promotion went through. It wasn't anger I felt. It was the realization that I'd been engaged to someone who measured loyalty in dollars. I stood up, took my jacket, and walked out. I didn't go far, just to the park near our apartment, where the air smelled faintly of rain. I sat there until sunset, watching people walk their dogs, couples laughing, kids running. Normal life. Something I hadn't felt in months. When I returned home, she was asleep on the couch, makeup smeared, surrounded by empty wine glasses. Her phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. A new text from an unsaved number glowed on the screen. It read, "Delete everything. They're asking questions. Don't contact me." No name. But the message was marked from a location, one I recognized. The same downtown hotel where Mark had hosted client events. I copied the message, took a screenshot, and set the phone down. The next day, I met with HR again, this time privately. I handed them the screenshot and told them it might help the case. They thanked me. Alicia didn't know I'd done it. She was too busy trying to reach her father, who still refused to speak to her. When he finally picked up, his words were cold, measured, final. He told her she'd embarrassed the family beyond repair, that she'd made her own bed, and he wouldn't bail her out again. Then he hung up. She sat at the table for an hour, staring at nothing. That night, she packed another bag. She said she needed space. I told her that was fine. She asked if I was leaving her. I said nothing, and that seemed to answer it for her. When she left, she didn't even close the door behind her. The apartment was silent again. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt earned. I cleaned up her half-empty glass, folded the blanket, and sat by the window. Somewhere out there, Mark was scrambling to hide the ashes of his career. Alicia was probably sitting in her car, realizing she had no one left to blame. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. Just steady, waiting. Because people like them always believe they can slip away clean. They forget there's always someone watching. The person who stayed quiet long enough to see how deep the rot went. The fallout hadn't even started yet, and I wasn't going to stop it. 2 weeks passed before everything collapsed. Alicia had moved in with a friend temporarily, though I suspected it wasn't out of shame but strategy. She was trying to find a way to claw her way back into someone's favor. Mine, her father's, or maybe even Mark's. She sent the occasional text, always polite, never emotional. "Hope you're doing okay. We should talk soon. I still care about you." I didn't respond to any of them. Work became strangely quiet after Mark's dismissal. People walked past my new office without saying much, their eyes filled with that mixture of curiosity and relief that always follows someone else's downfall. Angela stopped by once to congratulate me on the promotion officially. She said my integrity during the audit had impressed corporate, that I'd probably saved dozens of people from being implicated in Mark's misuse of funds. I nodded, thanked her, and went back to work. But the truth was, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like cleaning up the mess after a long, ugly storm. The real consequences began when Alicia's father, Evan, called me. His voice was exhausted. He asked if I'd heard from her. I said only through text. He sighed, said she'd tried to move some of his money out of a shared account she wasn't supposed to access anymore. Apparently, she'd convinced him to put her name on certain funds years ago for emergency use. He caught the transaction in time and froze the account. His final words to me were quiet but heavy. "I can't help her anymore. She's made her bed." The same day, I got an email from HR confirming the outcome of the internal investigation. Mark had been found guilty of embezzlement, falsifying invoices, and conflict of interest. Legal charges were being prepared. Alicia's name had come up during questioning. Though they hadn't pursued her formally, she'd been categorized as an external beneficiary. Still, that term alone was enough to destroy her professional credibility. By Friday, her firm had let her go. Officially, it was for restructuring, but everyone knew better. She'd been working for one of our partner companies. Ironically, the one Mark had directed most of the fake marketing expenses through. The connection was too obvious to ignore. That weekend, she showed up at my building. I saw her on the security camera feed before she even rang the bell. Her hair was tangled, her eyes swollen, her expression somewhere between rage and desperation. When I opened the door, she pushed past me, dropping her purse onto the floor. "You need to help me," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't move. "Help you with what?" "Everything's falling apart," she said. "I lost my job, my dad cut me off, and everyone thinks I was part of his fraud thing." She ran her hands through her hair, pacing. "I didn't know about the money, I swear. I just thought he was helping me out." Her words fell into the silence of the apartment. She looked around, noticing my things rearranged, her photos gone, her side of the closet empty. "You already moved out?" she asked, voice cracking. I said I was only making space. Her eyes filled with tears. You can't just throw everything away because I made one mistake. One, I said quietly. That stopped her. She stared at me, trying to read my face, maybe hoping for softness that wasn't there. When she didn't find any, she switched tactics. Anger. You think you're some kind of hero now? She snapped. You ruined his life. You destroyed everything because you couldn't handle the idea that someone else wanted me. I didn't answer. Her words came faster, sharper. She said I'd embarrassed her, humiliated her father, and played victim for sympathy. I just stood there, letting her spiral until her voice cracked again. Finally, I said, Mark's being charged with embezzlement. You knew where the money came from. You just didn't want to ask. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then she said the thing that revealed exactly who she'd always been. He told me he'd leave his wife. He told me we'd start a new life once he had enough saved. I waited for him. I believed him. I didn't say it, but I realized she wasn't mourning me, or even her reputation. She was mourning the life she thought she'd stolen and lost. When she finally stopped crying, I handed her an envelope. Inside was a check, her half of the security deposit for the apartment, and the remainder of her personal belongings list I'd inventoried. No note, no explanation. She looked at it like it was an insult. That's it. That's all there's left, I said. Her eyes hardened. You think you're free from me? I don't think, I said. I know. She slammed the door on her way out, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. After she left, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the street below. Rain had started to fall, slow and steady. I wondered if she even had anywhere to go. But that thought didn't stay long. Pity had no place left here. A month later, I heard through a mutual co-worker that Mark had been arrested. His assets were frozen, his wife filed for divorce, and his name had become a whispered warning in every boardroom. The same co-worker said Alicia tried to contact him in jail. He refused to take her call. Evan reached out again around that time, asking if I was doing all right. He said he regretted not telling me about her past sooner. I told him it wouldn't have mattered. She would have found another way to hide it. He said he'd started seeing a therapist after everything, that he was trying to understand how his daughter became so good at deception. I told him not to blame himself. Some people just learn how to lie like it's language. Life eventually settled. I focused on work, took the new role seriously, started traveling again. I didn't talk about what happened to anyone. It became one of those stories people whispered about behind closed doors, always slightly exaggerated, but never far from the truth. The strangest moment came months later, during a follow-up visit at the same dental clinic. The assistant recognized me immediately and smiled awkwardly. No big secrets this time, right? She joked. I smiled back, faintly. Let's hope not. As I sat in the same chair, staring at the same sterile ceiling, the memory flickered through my mind. The heart rate monitor, her whisper, the look on her father's face. It felt like a lifetime ago, like someone else's story. When the dentist finished, I thanked him and left quietly. Outside, the air was bright and clear after the rain. I walked past a cafe, stopped for coffee, and sat by the window watching people rush to their routines. Couples holding hands. Coworkers laughing. Ordinary life moving forward. There was no dramatic ending, no grand speech, no cinematic revenge. Just consequence, the kind that burns slow and steady until there's nothing left to hide behind. Alicia never reached out again after that day. Her father sold his house and moved out of state. The company rebuilt its reputation under Angela's leadership. And I learned something simple but permanent. Sometimes silence does more damage than any confrontation ever could. The world kept turning, as it always does. But whenever I passed that clinic on my way to work, I couldn't help glancing through the glass. The waiting room looked the same. White walls, faint hum, the reflection of a monitor light flickering in the corner. It was strange how the smallest sound, one whisper under sedation, could change the entire course of a life. And this time, I didn't feel anger, only relief, because I'd heard the truth once. And that was enough.